LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out 30 of the weekend's best clips for what should be a really good show for you all tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. This week, unfortunately, with Bill Maher off and Saturday Night Live not set to premiere until October 3rd, I don't have my usual sources of political comedy, but I think I have a stand-in for the week, as I'll explain after I briefly describe this week's topics. As usual, you can see all the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you can see time indexes down there to skip to the topics that most interest you. Again, I'll be starting with the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign, which again took up most of the Sunday morning shows, although not so much of them this week. This week, while I'll be starting again with the Republican side of the 2016 presidential race, Donald Trump again mercifully did not appear or phone into any of the Sunday morning news shows, though Trump as frontrunner will be the topic of most of the only, I think, 10 clips this week I have on the Republican side. Then I'll have 4 clips on the Democratic side of the 2016 race. No Bernie Sanders this week, though I do have a couple clips of a new entrant, campaign finance reformer Professor Lawrence Lessig. Next, I'll have about half a dozen clips on the corporate news media finally covering the growing refugee crisis that's spilling over from the Middle East into Europe. And I'll follow that with several clips on race and specifically how Fox News has basically declared war on BlackLivesMatter this week, and Fox News has tried to link Black Lives Matter to some killings of police officers. I'll also have a couple quick clips on developments on the Iran deal before ending with several clips on this Kentucky Clerk Kim Davis, who's fighting against marriage equality and is now in jail because she didn't issue same-sex marriage licenses. But first, as I said, I'm starting with the Republican half of the 2016 presidential race and provide the political comedy this week. Since I don't have any official political comedy, I'll have clips of former Republican vice presidential nominee and resigned governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin, who's been having something of a mutual admiration society going on with the Republican frontrunner Donald Trump, to the extent that Jake Tapper over on CNN's State of the Union asked her this morning what cabinet position she might like in a Trump administration, and got the answer over in this clip.
Donald Trump says that he would love to have someone of your strength in his administration. When you take a look at the cabinet, is there a particular area you think would line up best with your strengths, a position you'd want to serve in?
That's a great question. I think a lot about the Department of Energy, because energy is my baby. Oil and gas and minerals, those things that God has dumped on this part of the earth for mankind's use, instead of us relying on unfriendly foreign nations for us to import their resources. I think a lot about Department of Energy, and if I were head of that, I'd get rid of it. And I'd let the states start having more control over the lands that are within their boundaries and the people who are affected by the developments within their states. So, you know, if I were in charge of that, it would be a short-term job, but it would be really great to have someone who knows energy and is pro-responsible development to be in charge.
All right, Secretary Sarah Palin then.
There's so much to hate in that clip, though I'm definitely amused that Sarah Palin picked herself a cabinet position that she could quickly quit, given that I like to introduce her in my videos as the resigned governor of Alaska, part of a pattern of quitting that I think you can see going all the way back to her college career, if I remember, from the 2008 presidential election. But the idea that the Department of Energy could be dissolved just by returning gas and mineral responsibility to the states misses several other functions of the Department of Energy, like regulating nuclear power. As those of you who watch my Iran nuclear deal coverage over the last few months may remember, I've had these clips of the Secretary of Energy, what's his name, Ernest Moniz, and he was on because of his expertise on nuclear facilities, having nothing to do with gas and minerals like Sarah Palin was saying. But I hope the idea of a Secretary of Energy, Sarah Palin, is just another thing to motivate people who oppose a President Trump, though I guess that's kind of a joke in itself. Still, I hope, though you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And to help you think about that, this next clip is Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press talking about the latest NBC Marist poll numbers that show Trump still is the front runner, with some good news also for Ben Carson and Ohio Governor John Kasich, and bad news for Jeb Bush and Scott Walker, as you can see over here.
In explaining away bad poll numbers, it's getting pretty late to use the excuse that it's early. Labor Day kicks off a new phase of the 2016 race, and we already got a taste of it this week. It's going to get a lot more contentious. We've got brand new NBC News Marist polls out of Iowa and New Hampshire. And for now, we're going to just look at the Republican side of the race. In Iowa, two candidates who've never held political office are blowing away the field. Donald Trump continues to lead at 29%. Ben Carson is close behind at 22%. Combined, they're over 50. No other candidate breaks double digits. In fact, no other candidate is above 6%. And look how things have changed since the last time we polled in July, about 6 weeks ago. Trump is up 12 points. Carson has tripled his number. Meanwhile, Jeb Bush's number has been cut in half. And the one-time Iowa leader, Scott Walker, well, his campaign appears to be on the verge of imploding if he's not careful. What's more, as we look at the rest of the field, many candidates who are counting on a strong performance in Iowa are barely on the board right now. Let's quickly move to New Hampshire, where Trump is also dominating, 28% of the vote. But look at here. Second place is John Kasich at 12%, the power of paid television ads on that one. Carson, again, in double digits at 11, ahead of Jeb Bush and Carly Fiorina. And since we last polled in July, Trump was still ahead, but lower. He's gained 7 points. Kasich and Carson have nearly doubled their support. Bush has faded. Fiorina is growing. And then look at the rest of the field. Paul, Cruz, Christie, Walker, and Rubio round out the top 10. And quickly, let me just show you Scott Walker again. He went down from 12% in New Hampshire to 4% right now. He was down from 19 to 5. Walker's free fall this summer is probably one of the poll's bigger story. Let me bring...
So those are the new Republican numbers in Iowa and New Hampshire, which make Trump's chances of being the Republican nominee seem greater and greater every week. And for a report on the week that's a little more narrative than the horse race numbers like that one from NBC, I want to turn to ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, introducing a report from Jonathan Karl, though George Stephanopoulos actually begins with a poll number showing that Trump is beating not Republicans, but Hillary Clinton in Iowa, which is a swing state. And then Jonathan Karl goes on to talk about some of Trump's challenges this week over in this clip.
Voice your vote, and Donald Trump dominating the race this Labor Day, defying political gravity with brand new polls showing him extending his lead in New Hampshire and Iowa, even defeating Hillary Clinton in a head-to-head matchup. But as John Karl reports, Trump faces new challenges as summer turns to fall.
With summer winding down, it's back to school for presidential candidates. And it was pledge week for Donald Trump. He now says he definitely won't make an independent run.
I will be totally pledging my allegiance to the Republican Party and the conservative principles for which it stands.
Part class clown, bing, 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 right? Part class bully.
Sit down.
That Donald is still head of the class, now soaring to 30% in the latest national poll, his highest grade yet. But it may be time for Trump to hit the books after he stumbled through foreign policy questions in an interview with conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt.
Are you familiar with General Soleimani?
Yes. Go ahead. Give me a little. Go ahead. Tell me.
He runs the Quds forces.
Yes. Okay. Right.
Do you expect his behavior?
The Kurds, by the way, have been horribly mistreated by us.
No, not the Kurds. The Quds forces, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Quds forces.
Trump later said he didn't hear the question, blasting Hewitt as a third-rate announcer with gotcha questions. And he says he has plenty of time to study up.
So the difference between Hezbollah and Hamas does not matter to you yet, but it will.
It will when it's appropriate. I will know more about it than you know, and believe me, it won't take me long.
Will Trump's fumble bring on revenge of the nerds? Enter Marco Rubio, who's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
I think if you don't know the answer to those questions, you're not going to be able to serve as commander-in-chief.
And Jeb Bush gave Trump a bilingual bashing as he fights back against the frontrunner's schoolyard attacks.
Si no estás totalmente en acuerdo con él, eres idiota o estúpido o que no tiene energía o bla, bla, bla. Eso es lo que hace.
Now another outsider is making a bid to be the most popular kid in class. Dr. Ben Carson making a huge leap in the polls, now second to Trump nationally and tied with him in Iowa. A new contender on the rise, his opponents on the attack. So will the summer of Trump be followed by the fall of Trump? For this week, Jonathan Karl, ABC News.
So that's the latest of Trump's domination of the news on the Republican side, as reported by ABC's Jonathan Karl. And I think Trump did show some weakness this week from that so-called gotcha question from conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt on the Quds Force. And in case you missed that part of the last clip, it was kind of in the middle there, I'm going to show you a replay of almost the exact same excerpt that ABC used, which Chuck Todd introduced over on NBC's Meet the Press over in this clip.
Are you familiar with General Soleimani?
Yes. I go ahead. Give me a little. Go ahead. Tell me.
He runs the Quds forces.
Yes. Okay. Right.
Do you expect
and I
his
think the
behavior?
Kurds, by the way, have been horribly mistreated by us.
No, not the Kurds. The Quds forces, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quds forces, the bad guys.
Right.
Do you expect his behavior to change as a result?
Kurds.
No, Quds.
If that.
Okay, since you watched it again and it was discussed in on just about all of the Sunday morning news shows, I also wanted to show where Jake Tapper had on Sarah Palin. Of course, since she's the famous victim of gotcha questions like, what magazines and newspapers do you read, I think it was, from Katie Couric, the CNN host of State of the Union had to ask the resigned governor of Alaska what she thought of Trump's performance on the gotcha question over in this clip.
Made a lot of headlines this week when he appeared to mistake the Quds Force, an Iranian military group, for the Kurds, a Middle Eastern people. He made his comments during an interview with conservative talk show host Hugh Hewitt. Senator Marco Rubio said about this, if you don't know the answer to these questions, you're not going to be commander-in-chief. You're not fit to be commander-in-chief, he suggested. Trump says that the questions amounted to a game of gotcha. What did you think?
I think I'd rather have a president who is tough and puts America first than can win a game of Trivial Pursuit. Some of those questions, I don't know if other candidates were posed the same question, so I don't know if they would have the answers, but I don't think the public gives a flying flip if somebody knows who today is a specific leader of a specific region or religion or anything, because that leader will change, of course, when the next president comes into power, just based on the volatility of politics in these other areas. So I don't think the public is so concerned about that. And then, it's kind of subjective too, right? Whether a candidate is worthy to be given attention and respect and be taken seriously if they don't know the leader of a tribe or a religion or even a country. How about other candidates who may not know the price of a barrel of oil today, or how much oil it is that we are importing from foreign nations, unfriendly foreign nations, and we have a ban on exporting our own oil, and we have prohibitions and bans on drilling for our own oil? Details maybe involved in that a candidate doesn't know? Hey, I'd be subjected if I say, hey, if you don't know that, well, then you're not worthy of being taken seriously, Mr. Candidate.
Donald Trump said.
Just a little bit more comic relief there. I don't know if you agree with Sarah Palin that voters don't give a flying flip if their president can win at Trivial Pursuit, but I would actually kind of like it if my president was pretty good at Trivial Pursuit, because I'd like him to be a knowledgeable person, and I don't know if he has to know that General Soleimani is the head of the Quds Force, although someone who just gets his foreign policy knowledge from watching the Sunday morning news analysis shows like I do, and like Donald Trump claimed a couple weeks ago, that's how he got his foreign policy experience. Even just from watching these shows every week for the last 20 years, I have picked up that General Soleimani is the head of the Quds Force, and apparently, I'm not going to show the clip, but one of the pundits actually said that General Soleimani is the Donald Trump of Iran, and he had to be pulled back from going too far, though I'm not sure exactly what that means. But I want to show a slightly less ridiculous response to the Donald Trump gotcha question. Sarah Palin, I mean, like I said, I'm including her for the comic relief, and I think I'll have one more clip of Sarah Palin a little bit later, but I want to show Carly Fiorina responding kind of to the same question over on CBS's Face the Nation, since Donald Trump was basically saying, you know, I'm a CEO, so, you know, I'll learn all this later, and I'll delegate to people who are knowledgeable, and I'll just, you know, manage the hell out of it. Or I think if you listen to the entire Donald Trump quote from the Hugh Hewitt show, he says something like, I'll do the military so well it will make your head spin, or something like that. But anyway, Carly Fiorina actually doesn't buy Donald Trump's explanation, because part of her candidacy is to oppose Donald Trump. And then, of course, at the end of this clip, she passes up an opportunity to directly attack Trump, but she does disagree with his answer over on Face the Nation this morning here.
Sure. Well, I want to talk to you about what voters should think about when they're thinking about non-politicians and being fit for the job. You had an interview just after Donald Trump spoke to radio host Hugh Hewitt. He asked some questions about Islamic terrorism and being commander-in-chief. You answered those questions. You also said what you didn't know. Donald Trump had more difficulty. Let's listen to a little bit of what he said.
Do you know the players without a scorecard yet, Donald Trump?
No, you know, I'll tell you honestly, I think by the time we get to office, they'll all be changed. They'll be all gone. I knew you were going to ask me things like this, and there's no reason, because, number one, I will hopefully find General Douglas MacArthur in the pack.
Donald Trump said that this kind of specific knowledge didn't matter. He would delegate. He'd get up to speed in 24 hours. That's what people in business do. You were a CEO. Is he right about that?
I disagree with him on that. I think it is very difficult to lead if you don't have the requisite knowledge. And I think it's perfectly acceptable that you don't know the name of every terrorist leader. I don't always either. I do think it's important to know who our enemies are. I think it's important to know the difference between Hamas and Hezbollah, and to know as well that both of them, for example, are proxies of Iran. I do think we've come to a place, though, where people realize that running for political office all your life isn't necessarily the most qualifying set of experiences either. I mean, we have a professional political class. 80% of the American people now think we have a professional political class that is either unwilling or unable to challenge the status quo of Washington and get anything done. And we have festering problems in Washington, not to mention a lack of leadership around the world. I understand how the economy works. I understand how the world works and who's in it, who are our friends and who are our enemies. I understand how big bureaucracies work, which is what Washington, D.C. has become. I understand technology and I understand leadership. And I think those are the necessary experiences and qualifications to become President of the United States.
So in keeping with this business theme, if you were on the hiring committee, would Donald Trump be fit to be commander-in-chief?
Well, that's not a question for me. That's a question for the voters.
So she definitely passed up an opportunity to attack Donald Trump there, but a lot of Republican candidates are trying to bring Trump's numbers down by attacking him. I'm actually going to show a clip now from CNN State of the Union. I like to show the way Jake Tapper's been starting the show, telling everyone what is the State of the Union. You know, last week we were actually talking about people who were gunned down on live TV, and it's actually not a story anymore. Like people were worrying last week it might not be a story a week later. So much so that Jake Tapper starts off his show by saying the State of the Union is gunning for a fight. He actually uses the word gun in his intro, even though last week gun violence was one of the top stories. And the gunning for a fight is Republicans who are forgetting Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment and attacking other Republicans. In this case, Republicans are attacking Donald Trump, and Donald Trump had kind of a fight with Jeb Bush, all of which is detailed in this introduction from Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, D.C., where the state of our union is gunning for a fight. This week, the so-called 11th commandment continued to go by the wayside as the Republican pack let loose with attacks upon their frontrunner, Donald J. Trump. First up, Jeb Bush, who hit back after Trump had criticized him for speaking Spanish on the trail.
Mr. Trump doesn't believe in those shared values. He wants to tear us down. He doesn't believe in tolerance. He doesn't believe in the things that have created the greatness of this country.
Then came Senator Marco Rubio, pouncing after Trump in a radio interview called a bunch of detailed foreign policy questions gotchas.
I think if you don't know the answer to those questions, you're not going to be able to serve as commander-in-chief.
And Senator Rand Paul warning Republicans of dire consequences if they vote to make Trump their nominee.
I do think Donald Trump would be a disaster for the country and a disaster for our party, and I think we'd suffer the worst defeat since 1964.
But so far, none of this seems to be able to stop Trump, who jumped to his highest poll numbers yet this week. He's at 30% nationally in a new Monmouth University poll, with fellow outsider Dr. Ben Carson in second place. So we decided we would...
So that actually at the end there was the Monmouth University poll, which kind of confirms what was in the NBC Marist poll that I showed earlier, that Donald Trump is winning the horse race. And it also talked about how various candidates on the Republican side are trying to figure out a way to successfully attack him, one of whom is Jeb Bush, the supposed front runner a while back. The conventional wisdom said that it was going to be Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Scott Walker, or possibly John Kasich. And the only one who seems to have a viable strategy at this point is John Kasich, because he's doing well in New Hampshire. Not everyone else of those conventional wisdom candidates is kind of tanked. And one of the reasons that Jeb Bush is now trying to show, that's one of the reasons that Jeb Bush is showing energy and trying to attack Donald Trump. And there's been this big back and forth between Trump and Jeb Bush this week that Chuck Todd introduced several clips showing the Jeb Bush versus Donald Trump war going on in this clip.
I got an interesting Trump versus Bush. Bush has decided to engage Trump, decided he has to do it, and he started this week. Here it is.
This guy can't negotiate his way out of a paper bag. He's very low energy.
This is not a guy who is a conservative, and using his own words is not a mischaracterization. No estás totalmente en acuerdo con él, eres idiota, o estúpido, o que no tiene energía, o blah, blah, blah.
When you get right down to it, we're a nation that speaks English. And I think while we're in this nation, we should be speaking English.
I think Donald Trump is trying to insult his way to the presidency, and it's not going to work.
I watched him this morning on television, and it's a little bit sad. Don't forget, he was supposed to win.
I'm sure as hell going to, when he attacks me personally or disparages my family, you're damn right I'm going to fight back. I hope you would do too.
Boy, this is not...
So yeah, that was how Chuck Todd covered the problem, or the conflict between Jeb Bush and Donald Trump this week, where they talked about whether people should, or whether Jeb Bush was having an advantage in the race for being able to speak Spanish, or whether it was actually something that is going to actually lose him points with the nativists and the racists in the Republican Party. And I actually saw while I was I like to read what my live viewers are posting during the show. They kind of keep me company while I'm playing the clips, and I actually post all the live comments over on my Patreon page. If you're watching this as a recorded show, one of those live comments I noticed came from someone named Pet Tapeworm.
Chris Wallace. Police officers targeted as anti...
It says here, people should only speak American, which actually is a foreshadowing of my next, and I think this is the last Sarah Palin clip of the night. This is talking about the Jeb Bush versus Donald Trump fight on whether Jeb Bush should speak Spanish. And several times in the clip, Sarah Palin does say that she does say speak Spanish and speak English. But one time in the clip, she actually says, you know, we should speak American in America. But she does say speak English several times. But one time she does say speak American for our comic relief of the night, talking to Jake Tapper about the conflict between Donald Trump and Jeb Bush over in this clip.
This week that Jeb Bush should speak English and not Spanish when he's campaigning in the U.S. Jeb Bush's response was that Trump doesn't value tolerance. What did you make of that debate?
I don't know what, you know, choosing to speak English or Spanish in a conversation, what that would have to do with somebody opposing it with tolerance or not. I think that it's a benefit of Jeb Bush to be able to be so fluent in Spanish, because we have a large and wonderful Hispanic population that you know, is helping to build America, and that's good, and that's a great relationship and connection that he has with them through his wife and through his family connections. On the other hand, you know, I think we can send a message that say, you want to be in America? A, you better be here legally or you're out of here. B, when you're here, let's speak American. I mean, let's speak English, and that's kind of a unifying aspect of a nation is the language that is understood by all. But, you know, I took Spanish in high school and I took French in high school. Shouldn't have taken them both because I got them all mixed up by the time I was graduating. But again, a benefit of Mr. Bush, and I think, you know, that's one of those issues too where whoop, goes right over the public's head. Legitimately so. They're on to the next issues that are very important for the candidates to be debating.
Goes right over the public's head. Well, I think it kind of went right over Sarah Palin's head there. I don't know. Some of her comments, like I said, I'm just adding them in because of the lack of political comedy this week from Bill Maher or Saturday Night Live or anywhere else. I don't know. Maybe I'll start taking clips from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, which is premiering this week. But I'll watch it and then see whether it is something that lasts and is viable all the way till my Sunday clip roundup. But I only have one more clip on the Republican side. Looks like I'm going to cover the entire Republican side of the race in half an hour this week, which is a little bit less than usual and not so much intensive Trump coverage. This next clip is the one conventional wisdom candidate who looks like he may actually have a chance because he's doing well in New Hampshire, not so much in Iowa. This is Ohio Governor John Kasich over on, let's see, which show was he? Oh, he was over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, who had an introduction of him trying to have an optimistic, positive, you know, Reagan-esque message, and then asked him how he's going to win. And he talks about his surge in New Hampshire and going state by state. And I don't know if he's actually going to be a threat to Donald Trump, but here he is explaining his strategy on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning here.
It's time that Americans stop being in a bad mood and complaining about things. We live in an unbelievable country. Do we have our problems? But why don't we get up tomorrow morning and why don't we count our blessings for having been born in the United States of America, okay? We have our problems, but they can be solved.
There is Governor John Kasich in New Hampshire this week. He joins us now. Welcome, Governor Kasich. Welcome back to This Week. You're trying to run a positive campaign there. You're trying to run a campaign based on experience. Governor of Ohio, 18 years in Congress as well. How are you going to sell that in, we were just talking about it, the year of the outsider?
Well, George, you know, in a very short period of time, I've risen to second place in New Hampshire.
Brand new poll out this morning.
And when we talk about all these national polls, I mean, we don't run a race for president based on national polls. We go state by state. And so, you know, we're going to have a presence in Iowa. We're very aggressive in New Hampshire with some of the Tom Rath, John Sununu, some of the biggest people helping me. We put people on the ground now in South Carolina, in Michigan. And, you know, I've been endorsed by Trent Lott lately, the governor of Alabama. You know, look, we're moving in many different directions. And here's what I think. Are people upset? Of course they are. But at the end of the day, they want somebody who can land the plane. I mean, that's what the whole panel needs to understand. At the end of the day, they're going to want somebody who can actually get the job done. And as for me, balancing the federal budget, one of the architects, turning Ohio around, defense experience, and look, and just being myself. I'm having a great time on the campaign trail, meeting a lot of people, and it's great.
What happens to...
So that's the last clip on the Republican side. The only conventional wisdom candidate who is still showing he may have a path to get the nomination, Ohio Governor John Kasich, because he's still doing well in New Hampshire, and that's the first in the United States of all the primaries. Iowa comes before that, but it's a caucus state, which means people can't just go to the polls and vote. They have to go to these meetings where they go off into different corners of the room depending on which candidate they support, and that's going to be weird with 17 different candidates. I mean, how many corners are there in a room? I don't know. But that, like I said, that's the last I want to do on the Republican side. I covered it in 31 minutes, something like that. So I want to move on to the Democratic side of the race. I only have 4 clips covering what's going on with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and then this new entrant into the race, Harvard professor and campaign finance reformer Lawrence Lessig, and I'll have a couple clips of him in a minute. But first I want to show how over on, let me make sure which, this is on NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd talked about how Hillary Clinton's been spending a lot of money in Iowa and New Hampshire, but Bernie Sanders is the one who has been gaining in the polls, and he's increased his lead in New Hampshire, and he is getting closer and closer in Iowa, as you can see over in this clip.
If you want to understand why Hillary Clinton felt she had to sit down for a 30-minute nationally televised interview with my colleague Andrea Mitchell and answer question after question about the email controversy, all you need to do is look at our new polling in Iowa and New Hampshire. Over the last month, the Clinton campaign has been pouring money into TV ads in both of those early states, over $2 million. And yet, take a look at her numbers. While Clinton continues to lead Bernie Sanders in Iowa by 11 points, 48-37, that's actually down from a 29-point lead in July before she went up with paid advertising. And now take a look at this. Sanders is now ahead by 11 points in New Hampshire. That is not a typo. We have him up 49-38. Just 2 months ago, before Hillary Clinton's campaign started running TV ads, Clinton led Sanders in New Hampshire by 13 points. Tom Brokaw.
So you can see that Hillary Clinton is spending a lot of money, but actually falling in the polls. That's the NBC report on that. And then the second clip I want to play is also from NBC's Meet the Press. This is actually an interview that with Richard Trumka from the AFL-CIO, talking about the difference between voting for Hillary Clinton and actually supporting her. And this kind of mirrors something I said a while back about how I think Hillary Clinton probably has my vote, but I wouldn't really do that much to, either give her money or go out and, try to organize for her, which I did both those things when it came to Barack Obama back in 2008. And here's Richard Trumka talking to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press, explaining sort of the same thing in this clip.
Democrats traditionally been able to count on the support of organized labor, but as we enjoy this Labor Day weekend, membership in labor unions remains in decline. In 1983, union members accounted for 20.1% of American workers. By 2014, that number was down to just 11.1%. Earlier this week, I sat down with Richard Trumka, he's the current president of the AFL-CIO, and asked him about what it would take for the labor movement to work hard for Hillary Clinton. His answer? It's all about whether she stands and takes a stand against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or what's known as TPP. Take a listen.
So here's the difference. I think if she doesn't take a position on TPP, then you can say she's looking for our vote. If she does take a position on TPP, then she's looking for our support. And the difference is, if you get my vote, I come out on election day and I pull the lever. If you got my support, I get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. I stuff 200 envelopes. I make 7 calls. I go knock on a few doors, and I get my neighbors all excited about voting for her as well. That's what's at stake for her.
And I think what Richard Trumka said there is really important for people. You know, a lot of people talk about whether they vote or they don't vote, and it's really important to go out and vote, but it's the least you can do. It is literally, or not literally, but it is almost literally the least you can do as a participant in a democracy is to just go out and vote, because your vote, it doesn't really matter that much. I mean, it's important that there's good voter turnout, because the more voter turnout there is, experience shows that progressives and liberals will do better, because the more people who vote, the people who are most likely to vote are the people who don't really favor progressive liberal ideas. It tends to be, old white Republicans who are most reliable coming out to the polls. So if you can reach out to the less reliable voters, you're generally getting people who support more democratic, more liberal, more progressive values. But the next clip I want to show is actually talking about a total change in the system. Before I get to that, I want to just finish that point about how getting out to vote is the least you can do. What really matters is if you have even $10 or $50 you can give to a candidate. So few people donate. If you do donate, it puts you in the top 10% category already in terms of political activism. And if you don't have the money, or the money isn't that, you can't give a large amount or even a significant amount, going out and volunteering for a candidate, phone banking or walking precincts, getting out the vote, all those things are things that express your political power a lot more than just getting out to vote yourself, which is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's your smallest political power. All these other things are ways that put you in just the vast minority of people and really make you a more powerful political person than just someone who goes out and votes. And even someone who goes out and votes is a more politically powerful person than the 50%, give or take, who don't vote in most election years here in the United States, depending on whether it's a presidential year or a non-presidential year. But in terms of the broken democracy, I now want to move on to a couple clips from a new entrant on the Democratic side, Lawrence Lessig, a professor from Harvard who I first became a fan of when he was fighting for fair use in the copyright realm, and he created Creative Commons. He's the person, or one of the people behind the Creative Commons movement that lets people open up their works to be used either with attribution or modified with attribution, but it gets rid of a lot of the copyright restrictions if people make their works available through Creative Commons. And he fought for fair use for a long time, and then he's moved over to this fight against money in politics, and he has gone a little farther than I agree with in terms of saying that he's in favor of a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, but that's actually not part of his presidential campaign, which is to get into office and pass what he calls the Citizens Equality Act of 2017. And down in the video description, I put a link to the basics of the Citizens Equality Act of 2017. It does not include a constitutional amendment. It does include public financing of campaigns and a few other things described in the introduction clip I want to show. First from George Stephanopoulos, kind of talking a little bit about Lawrence Lessig, and then Lawrence Lessig answering a question about why he's running for president over in this clip.
Newest and, believe it or not, most unusual candidate for president this year. His name is Lawrence Lessig, Harvard law professor, a hero in the movement to open up the internet and our democracy. And this morning, his online campaign topped the $1 million stake he needs to launch his campaign. His platform, Comprehensive Campaign Finance and Election Reform, it's backed by a promise no candidate has ever made before. If Lessig passes that platform, he will resign and turn over power to his vice president. Professor Lessig, welcome to This Week. You're in?
I'm great. I'm in, George. It's great to be here.
So what exactly are you running to do?
Well, I think I'm running to get people to acknowledge the elephant in the room, right? We have to recognize we have a government that does not work. The stalemate partisan platform of American politics in Washington right now doesn't work. And we have to find a way to elevate the debate, to focus on the changes that would actually get us a government that could work again, that is not captured by the tiniest fraction of the 1% who fund campaigns and make it impossible for our government to do anything.
So that's campaign finance reform, voting rights reform?
And also dealing with a crazy way we have political gerrymandering where politicians pick the voters rather than the voters pick the politicians.
And you're saying that if you run, if you are running, if you win, if you become president and you pass that platform, you'll resign?
That's right, because what we need is a focus that could cut across partisan lines and say this is the mandate. The mandate is to achieve this fix to the corrupted system, to fix the democracy first. And the only way I could have that mandate, or anybody could have that mandate, is that this is the thing they ran on. If you have 7 other issues that you're running on, then of course you get into Washington and everybody thinks your mandate is one of this or one of that, and that's not going to make it possible to take this on.
That puts a lot of weight on who your vice president is. Your website has a graphic showing the possible candidates for vice president. You're putting an online poll up there right now. But it does put so much weight.
Now, not only were Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders on that little last end of the clip there as the possible vice president that Lawrence Lessig would resign and allowed to become president, but I noticed Jon Stewart, his picture was on there. Somehow that doesn't seem like a viable presidential candidate, but I guess he's out of work at the moment. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section on who Lawrence Lessig should have as his presidential candidate. And I want to show one more clip of Lawrence Lessig talking to George Stephanopoulos. In this clip, George Stephanopoulos asks him why it is that what he's doing is more, when he says that campaign finance reform and these other reforms have to be implemented to get anything done, how would he respond to an Obama supporter who says, well, we got health care done and Obama was successful somewhat in, implementing change and hope, or I don't know. I don't think that that's really a strong argument anyway, but you can see how Lawrence Lessig explains that it's not a very good argument over in this clip.
American politics. Look, I'm a Democrat. I would love to be in the days when we could have supermajority in the Senate and a majority in the House. That's not reality. So rather than dumbing down the debate by reinforcing the partisan divide, we have to elevate the debate and get to a principle that, in fact, Americans agree about, that would fix this democracy and make it possible for government to actually do something without fear of what the funders want them to do.
But you could, a supporter of President Obama could argue, wait a second, the problems you raised didn't prevent health care from being implemented, Dodd-Frank from being implemented, all kinds of reforms over the last 4 years.
Yeah, they could say that, but of course you have to remember when health care was passed, we had a supermajority in the Senate and we had a majority in the House. And even health care had to make important compromises to the special interests. So drug prices can't be negotiated because pharmaceutical companies said they would spend millions to defeat Democrats. And the public option that the president promised was thrown out the window when insurance companies said they would spend millions to defeat Democrats. So even the most important thing he did, and I'm a big supporter of the president, he's been an amazing president, but the most important thing he did is compromised by the corrupt way in which we fund campaigns. And Dodd-Frank, look, every Democrat is talking now about we have to go back and have a new law to take on Wall Street. But you can't take on Wall Street, George, until you change the way campaigns are funded, because the biggest funder of campaigns in Congress is Wall Street.
Lawrence Lessig, thanks very much. You hit your $1 million. Let's see if you hit 1% in the polls and get in the debates. Thanks for coming on.
So that would actually be cool if Lawrence Lessig were in the debates, and I am keeping my mind open about possibly supporting Lawrence Lessig, even though it's kind of a gimmick candidacy where he wants to pass one thing and then resign. No president has ever done anything like that, and in a way I think it might be a bad precedent for the presidency, because There are some, like one-issue candidates, I really wouldn't want to see elected with all this momentum behind one idea that's wildly popular but maybe not such a great idea. But nothing in Lawrence Lessig's campaign looks like a bad idea. Like I said, I look through and they aren't asking for the constitutional amendment. They're looking for public financing and other reforms that fall short of, overturning Citizens United through a constitutional amendment, which is one of my worries that I've talked about in the past. But anyway, so that's the last clip I want to show on the Democratic side. And I also now want to move on to this topic that hasn't gotten a lot of coverage in the corporate media here in the United States, even though this is not the first week that it's been a topic I've seen covered a little bit during the week, but didn't make it to the Sunday morning shows, and that's the growing refugee crisis in Europe. This week kind of blew up in Hungary as these refugees from mostly Syria, but also Iraq and Afghanistan, have come across from Turkey to Greece and Hungary. And there's one clip I'm not going to show from the former British Foreign Secretary David Miliband talking about how there are thousands and thousands of refugees trapped on the island of Lesbos. But the first clip I do want to show is one of the several overview reports on the problem. And it talks about how the issue really blew up this week because of a photo of a Syrian child who washed up dead on a beach in Turkey. I think that photo is shown in a couple of the reports. This first report I'm going to show is, from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. George Stephanopoulos introduces some breaking news about John Kerry warning Vladimir Putin in Russia not to aid Assad because Assad is making this whole refugee problem worse. And then he hands off to Alex Marquardt in Vienna, reporting on the refugee crisis in this clip.
And Germany. That comes as Secretary of State John Kerry issues a new warning to the Russians about their military buildup in Syria, where war has sparked this worst refugee crisis since World War II. ABC's Alex Marquardt starts us off from Vienna. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, George. This is one of the two main train stations here in Vienna where all weekend refugees have been coming off of trains from the border with Hungary. Most of them are Syrians, all marveling at the warm reception they've received here in Austria. Here behind me, you can see different aid groups as well as regular Austrians who have been distributing food here, handing out clothes, as well as helping with travel information. The vast majority of the refugees we've spoken with want to go on to Germany, which has said they will take all those who come, and there are many more who are coming.
Arriving in the Austrian capital this morning, refugees poured onto the platform, many wrapped in blankets, children clinging to their parents.
These hundreds have just come off the train from the Hungarian border, clearly weary, but lots of smiles on their faces, very happy to be here, welcomed warmly by translators who speak Arabic and other languages, teams of volunteers with cups of hot tea, and rounds of applause from local Austrians.
Emotional scenes, these two sisters from Syria heading to Germany, overwhelmed as they come to the end of the long and dangerous journey. In Germany, 8,000 people have reportedly already arrived since yesterday, welcomed with applause and signs.
Now we are free.
All thrilled to have escaped Hungary, where they were stranded for days, blocked by the government from leaving. So they tried to walk the 150 miles to the border on the highway, in wheelchairs, on crutches, parents carrying exhausted children.
Why didn't help? Why didn't come?
Most here, Syrians fleeing the war, crossing the Mediterranean Sea in flimsy boats where so many have lost their lives, and making their way north into Europe. International outrage exploding after these heartbreaking images of a 3-year-old Syrian toddler drowned on a Turkish beach. The crisis fueling calls for a long-term solution, raising questions about how many refugees countries can and will take in. Will it encourage more to make the perilous trip? But for these young Syrians, those are questions for another day. Right now, they're just happy they made it this far, ready for a new life.
And even though you've been traveling for days and walking so much, you're still also happy.
Yeah, because it's finished.
It's finished?
Yeah, we'll start a new future.
Your future starts now?
Yeah.
And George, the Pope announced this morning that the Vatican will be taking in 2 Syrian families, and he called on Catholic parishes across Europe to do the same. Meanwhile, the U.S. is also coming under increased pressure to accept more refugees. George?
Okay.
So that was Alex Marquardt, the ABC reporter on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, who ended with that news about the Pope, and that was kind of the news that John Dickerson over on CBS's Face the Nation started off his report, and then he handed it over to their reporter in Vienna, Charlie D'Agata, who had a similar report on the refugees, and he also pointed out how even though some refugees have now made it to Austria, there are new refugees over in Hungary that still aren't doing so well, so it's not really a solved problem over in this clip.
We turn now to the growing humanitarian crisis in Europe. This morning, Pope Francis called on religious communities to welcome the hundreds of thousands of migrants, many of them refugees from war-torn Syria, who've tried to escape to a better life. After being stranded in Hungary for days, many have found safe passage to Germany and Austria. CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us from Vienna with the latest.
Good morning, John. Well, here is the scene in Vienna. They've been welcoming migrants off the train. These have come in from the border. They're not sticking around here, though. Most of them are headed to Germany, and the flow has been endless.
The mass exodus of mostly Syrian migrants had been going on for months, but this week a surge of thousands quickly overwhelmed struggling European countries with no clear plan on how to handle the sheer numbers. Hungary's haste to erect a razor wire fence along its border with Serbia didn't do much to slow them down. But the Budapest train station became the flashpoint as Hungary blocked desperate migrants from boarding trains to Germany and Austria, demanding they register for asylum first. Haggard but defiant, they mustered what energy they had left and set off to the border on foot.
There is no other way. We stay in Budapest for 8 days. No train, no taxi, no anything.
The move forced Hungary's hand. The government deployed a fleet of buses to pick them up along the highway and the train station and drop them off at the border with Austria. Having crossed into Austria and onward to Germany, the migrants were greeted with food and drinks, cheers, and open arms.
Now, it may seem that the situation is improving, and it certainly has for those migrants who've been able to get to places like Austria and Germany, but it is a much different story for the hundreds of migrants that are arriving by the day in Hungary. There's no guarantee that they will be allowed to travel onwards.
So that's the CBS report. Before that, I showed the ABC report. Now I want to show how they covered it over on NBC's Meet the Press. This was, I think, the last report made a good point about how the refugees now just getting into Hungary may not be doing as well as the ones who have now made it to Austria. This report from NBC, I think, focuses a little more on the problems over in Syria and what's causing the refugees to flee over into Europe. It's a little longer than the other two also over in this clip.
Welcome back. There have been jubilant scenes this weekend as thousands of refugees arrived in Germany and Austria after Hungary eased restrictions on their travel. But there's still no signs of the crisis abating as tens of thousands more attempt to make a similar journey. According to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, over 360,000 migrants have crossed the Mediterranean to reach Europe so far this year, and just over half of those are fleeing Syria. The Syrian refugees have endured a dangerous journey that started on the Syrian-Turkish border, most traveling by boat from Turkey to Greece, and then through Macedonia, Serbia, and Hungary, with Budapest's main train station a choke point. Our chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is at the train station in Budapest, where thousands are still hoping to continue their journey to the Austrian border. A warning, his report contains some disturbing images.
The world finally awoke to a tragedy that has been building for years. Forced to pay attention by powerful images. The boy who washed up on a beach while trying to get to Greece. The train in Hungary blocked by police. Migrants dragged off to camps. Families at Budapest Grand Railway Station and under it, where conditions were so squalid they decided to walk out of the country until Hungary got too embarrassed and decided to send buses to pick them up.
But getting less attention is the cause of this crisis. These people are overwhelmingly from Iraq and Afghanistan, where U.S. military interventions failed to bring stability, and from Syria, where a lack of international action allowed a civil war to rage on. They are escaping failed states and failed policies.
It's been 4 years since the Assad government started bombing its own people. ISIS has now carved out its own state. If the U.S.-led war on ISIS were working, people wouldn't be going to such great lengths to leave, and the U.S. is barely taking in any.
The United States has always taken the position that as the leader of the world community, as the wealthiest country in the world, as an immigrant country ourselves, we have to respond to refugee disasters wherever they occur in the world.
European officials, perhaps troubled by their own dark past of trains, camps, and unwanted people, have decided the solution is to redistribute the migrants among their nations. But the migrants don't want to go to poorer European countries, and there are simply too many of them. Draining the world's war zones and spreading them around Europe won't work.
When you have 11 million Syrian homeless, half the population of Syria, when you have these tragedies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Libya, we've got to wake up and accept the fact that the United States has a self-interest in trying to end these humanitarian disasters. We also have a moral responsibility to act as the leading democratic country in the world.
And the crisis is already causing the rise of the right wing. This is a global crisis that Washington, morally and strategically, can't ignore.
And Richard...
So that's the NBC Meet the Press coverage with Chuck Todd and Richard Engel there. And you notice Richard Engel was actually in Budapest, Hungary, not in Vienna like the last two reports, which may be why he was a little bit closer to the beginning of the chain in Syria, and they gave a little bit more emphasis in the report on what's going on there. I also want to show a clip from the former British, or it's actually two clips from the former British Foreign Secretary David Miliband, who now heads the International Rescue Committee that's been dealing with some of these refugees. This is the clip of him from Meet the Press. He was on a couple shows. Over on Meet the Press, he was talking about what are the causes, and he blamed the Western powers. He blamed Assad in Syria, and then he blamed the European Union specifically over in... Let me make sure I don't start the wrong clip here. Over here.
The press. Let me ask you a basic question that is in today's New York Times. And it's simply, who failed Aylan Kurdi? That's, of course, the name of the 3-year-old child that was found dead on the shores there. Who failed him?
I think there's been 3 levels of failure. Obviously, he was barrel bombed out of his own city. First of all, Damascus, then Kobani, by his own government. So the primary responsibility starts with President Assad. Secondly, there's been a chronic failure over the last 4 years of international powers, including the US, but also significantly Russia and regional powers like Saudi Arabia and Iran, to come to grips with the nature of the Syrian civil war, so that it's metastasized now into not just a Syria civil war, but one that engulfs parts of Iraq as well. And then the third culprit clearly is the European Union, whose fumbling, feeble response over the last few years and significantly over the last few months has led to the appalling scenes that you've seen on TV screens and newspapers around the world.
So that's David Miliband, over the former British Foreign Secretary, now, like I said, the head of this International Rescue Committee over on NBC's Meet the Press, talking about people who are to blame for all these refugees. And now I want to show a clip of him over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos pointed out that the United States has only taken like 1,400 refugees from Syria in the last 4 years. And you heard in one of those earlier reports, there are actually 11 million Syrian homeless. The vast majority of those are in border countries. Jordan has huge numbers of refugees. I showed clips on that several months back. Lebanon has a bunch of refugees. But there's this UN report that says like 130,000 refugees have to be resettled outside the Middle East, which is why you'll hear David Miliband over in this next clip say that the United States has to take leadership and say that we're going to accept 65,000, not the 1,400 we've accepted over the last 4 years. And that's from ABC this morning, this week with George Stephanopoulos in this clip.
There's been new calls, as Alex said, on the United States taking more refugees. The United States has taken only about 1,400 so far. But what do you say to those Americans who are concerned that if you start to take in more refugees from Syria, you run the risk of letting in those who might commit terror as well?
Well, all the evidence is, first, it's tougher to get to America as a refugee than to come in under any other route. There's proper security guidelines, proper vetting by the Department of Homeland Security. And my organization, the International Rescue Committee, has for 80 years been resettling refugees in America. And we have successful Syrian American communities in the Midwest, in California, waiting to welcome those people. And just to put it in perspective, the US has always been a leader in refugee resettlement. But 1,500 people over 4 years is such a minuscule contribution to tackling the human side of this problem that people are rightly, in my view, sponsoring legislation in the United States Senate for that number to be anything like the 65,000 by the end of 2016 that would represent the kind of leadership that America has traditionally shown on these kind of issues.
You served as British.
So the reason I wanted to emphasize the numbers in that clip, that the United States has only taken 1,400 Syrian refugees over the last 4 years, that there are actually 11 million Syrian homeless, that the UN has said 130,000 of those need to be resettled outside the Middle East, and that David Miliband, the head of the International Rescue Committee, is saying to show leadership, the United States should take 65,000 of those refugees. I wanted to point out those numbers because the last clip I want to show on this topic is the Fox News coverage of the refugee crisis, and I thought that overall it was fairly similar to the clips I showed at the beginning. It starts off with Chris Wallace handing it over to their reporter Greg Palkot. I think he's also in Vienna. But the one thing about this report that I think is totally out of context and spin is Greg Palkot saying that the United States has taken 1,000 refugees, but that's like such a minuscule number, but you'd never know it from the way it's reported over on Fox News this morning, Fox News Sunday, in this clip.
Here's the latest on the flood of migrants overwhelming Europe. Thousands of refugees traveling by train and bus have now reached safe havens in Germany overnight. Thousands more are expected today. But neighboring Hungary, which has struggled to manage the mass flow of people, warns the human tide from the Middle East and Africa is still on the rise. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palkot has more. Greg.
Chris, this weekend, Europe is grappling with the biggest refugee crisis it has faced since World War II. They have broken out of refugee camps, they have fought with police, and in their thousands, they've taken to roads and highways in their struggle for survival. It's estimated that some 340,000 refugees and migrants have come to Europe so far this year, fleeing war in Syria and Afghanistan, poverty in Africa and Asia. There is no end in sight.
Business as usual or incremental improvements of mechanisms in place will not be able to address what it is today, a massive refugee and migration crisis in Europe.
Many of these desperate people want to go to Germany for good reason. It has the strongest economy and the most liberal asylum laws. But other European countries like Hungary don't want to host these migrants. They don't even want them passing through.
So the moral human thing is to make clear, please don't come. Why you have to go from Turkey to Europe? Turkey is a safe country. Stay there.
Still bringing people together around the world this past week, the image of a 3-year-old toddler on a Turkish beach. He, his brother and mother drowned trying to make their way from Syria to Europe.
They were going for a better life.
For its part, the U.S. has taken in just over 1,000 Syrian refugees in the past year. More to be done all around. Chris.
Greg Palkot reporting.
Yeah, like I said, that last number there that the U.S. has taken in over 1,000 refugees in the past year makes it sound like we've actually done something, unless you realize that David Miliband, the former British Foreign Secretary and head of the International Rescue Committee, is saying we should take in 65,000. and that there are 11 million homeless and just from the Syrian conflict. So those are the clips I wanted to show on the refugee crisis. You know, I haven't shown any on this refugee crisis because it hasn't really been covered at all by the Sunday morning news analysis shows here in the corporate media in the United States. Even though I know there were like hundreds and hundreds of refugees who died in the Mediterranean trying to get from Libya to Europe earlier in the year, but that wasn't covered at all. But anyway, I'm glad that at least the refugee crisis made it into the shows this week. And I showed a little bit of kind of subtle Fox News bias in that last clip. So in this next topic, this is all about much more patent, easily observable Fox News bias. It has to do with the issue of race and the Black Lives Matter movement. You will never guess what the top story on Fox News Sunday this morning was. And I'm going to show the entire introduction because the whole thing is kind of biased. You'll see when they get to Iran, there's this fair and balanced discussion. They not only have Dick Cheney on talking about the Iran deal, but they have Liz Cheney too. So that's fair and balanced, right? Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney. But they start off with the top story. I couldn't believe what the top story on Fox News Sunday was. Not even really covered as a story on any of the other shows, but here's Fox News Sunday intro this morning here.
Chris Wallace. Police officers targeted as anti-cop rhetoric reaches new lows. What can ease the tensions?
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon! Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon!
We've heard Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Well, cops' lives matter too.
At some point in time, you got to stop yelling and screaming and start listening and discussing.
We'll discuss the deadly attacks on police, as well as rising murder rates in major American cities, with two top cops, Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey and Milwaukee Police Chief Edward Flynn. Then, President Obama gets enough votes in Congress to ensure his nuclear deal with Iran will take effect. We'll talk with former Vice President Dick Cheney and his daughter Liz about that and an Obama foreign policy they say has dangerously weakened America. And we'll ask our Sunday panel about Donald Trump's change of mind.
I will be totally pledging my allegiance to the Republican Party.
All right now.
So I guess Fox News Sunday got to the Republican and presidential race, which was the top story, I think, on all the other shows. They all covered at least the 2016 presidential race, I think, was the top story. None of them covered these police officers who've been killed over. There have been several police officers killed, but the thing is, there actually been less police officers killed this year than last year. So the trend that they're talking about doesn't really exist except on Fox News. And Fox News has kind of like made this decision to take on Black Lives Matter. You know, I showed I made a quick sort of edited, produced video this last week saying Fox News asks if Black Lives Matter is a hate group, and it showed an ad for Bill O'Reilly's show where asking, is Black Lives Matter a hate group? But Bill O'Reilly answered the question. According to him, Black Lives Matter is a hate group. And I've heard, I remember reading an article by Gabriel Sherman, who's the author of this book here, The Loudest Voice in the Room, which is sort of a biography of Roger Ailes and his creation of Fox News. He said in one of the articles he recently wrote that if you want to know what the Roger Ailes ideology is, listen to what Bill O'Reilly is saying. And Bill O'Reilly basically is saying on this that Black Lives Matter is a hate group, and the whole decision by Fox News to take on Black Lives Matter this last week was covered over on CNN's Reliable Sources by the host Brian Stelter, showing several clips from Fox News this last week, and I'm going to show that clip over here.
A hate group, a murder movement. These are some of the terms floated by Fox News this week to describe the Black Lives Matter movement. a movement that says it exists to demand accountability and justice for victims of police violence. Here's a few of the comments made on Fox this week.
Kevin, why has the Black Lives Matter movement not been classified yet as a hate group? I mean, how much more has to go in this direction before someone actually labels it as such?
I think they're a hate group. They hate police officers.
Well, they have strong feelings about
No, they hate them. They want them dead. Pigs in a blanket is dead.
I don't think we're watching the same Black Lives Matter movement. I think if you talk to any of the organizers on the ground, both in Ferguson, in Baltimore, and New York, they will tell you they're a non-violent movement, and all they want to do is end the disparities.
Why were they chanting pigs in a blanket, frying like bacon? That was the Black Lives Matter movement in Minnesota. Why?
Here's some context for what you just saw. This on-air offensive came after recent killings of police officers and the reaction to chants at a Black Lives Matter march in Minnesota, where some of the people in the crowd could be heard saying this.
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
For some reason, some of the organizers said that was actually in humor, some attempt at being playful. Let's talk about the backlash.
So you can see there that Fox News has decided to turn on Black Lives Matter, or to target Black Lives Matter this last week, and maybe even try to destroy it the way they spent so much time trying to destroy the Occupy movement. And it's kind of similar, the vulnerability of the Occupy movement is somewhat similar to the vulnerability of the Black Lives Matter movement, because it's a grassroots movement that doesn't really have leaders. I mean, there were these 3 black women who kind of started it, I think going back to the killing of Trayvon Martin, but it's grown into so many grassroots activists who don't have message discipline coming from the top, where if you were really a communications professional, you would tell your activists, don't say things like pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. That is going to just create a backlash and give fuel to Fox News. And the whole Fox News war on Black Lives Matter was not confined to Bill O'Reilly. It was all over Fox News this last week, and it continued over on Fox News Sunday, not just in the introduction to the show that I showed earlier, but also you can see the first segment they did this whole long segment with 2 police officers talking about how Black Lives Matter was causing harm to police officers. You can see with this, starts off with this kind of misleading introduction from Chris Wallace talking about the trend. We recently, many have recently observed a trend in the killing of police officers, even though, like I said, there have been fewer police officers killed in 2015 than at this point in 2014, but that fact never makes it into the Fox News Sunday report here from Chris Wallace. And then he tees up this police chief from Milwaukee to say that the news media has been playing up these isolated incidents of police officers killing young black men who are unarmed or whatever that show up on video, and it's creating a false narrative, not the Fox News narrative. That's not the false narrative over in this clip.
Washington. Like a lot of people, we noticed a deeply disturbing trend this week. A policeman gunned down north of Chicago became the 24th law enforcement officer murdered in the line of duty this year. Since Ferguson last August, 44 officers have been shot and killed. And this comes at a time of growing anti-police rhetoric and a spike in murders in some of our biggest cities. We're joined today by 2 leaders in law enforcement: Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey and Milwaukee Police Chief Edward Flynn. Chief Flynn, you said recently every cop in America is looking over his shoulder and they don't feel that America has their back. Is that contributing to this rash of police shootings?
I think we have to look at a broader context, but I certainly think it's an element. A number of things have happened, and I'm wondering, as we look at both the police shooting phenomenon and the increase in homicide in our major cities, you can't disaggregate these 2 phenomena. And I think there's a number of variables at work that we might be able to discuss later that have to do with us being at some sort of tipping point. We're not sure if we've just got a spike or a real tipping point and a change phenomenon, but there are some concerning issues, and one of them is the relentless propaganda war being waged against American police officers by our network television stations. It's been most distressing to watch them try to link 6 or 8 questionable video recordings of police misconduct and turn that into a national narrative of what the state of police-community relations are. It's a false construct, but it is a dangerous one.
Okay, we're going to...
Well, I don't really know if it's a false construct, and anyone who thinks it's a false construct, I recommend you read the 2 books over my left shoulder here. The New Jim Crow, which is about how our criminal justice system has replaced the Jim Crow system of segregation to be a new system of racist control in the United States, and there's some really compelling arguments in there. And then the other book I have here is Matt Taibbi's The Divide, talking about how the rich have an entirely different criminal justice system than the poor, who are being totally screwed over in a class way. So this is sort of like the class. Matt Taibbi is giving you the class warfare part, and then Michelle Alexander in The New Jim Crow is telling you how it's a racist system of control. And I think that sort of contradicts what you heard in terms of the false narrative from that Milwaukee police chief, but that didn't deter Chris Wallace in this next clip from, again, saying that what you're seeing on video is an isolated series of incidents, compared, of course, to what he was talking about, the dead police officers. Even though the trend is down in terms of numbers, he still saw that as a trend. And then he's talking to Charles Ramsey, who, in his answer to Chris Wallace here, you know, I used to be a public defender, a criminal defense attorney who's appointed to defend people who can't afford an attorney, and so under the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, they get the right to counsel, and so they get an attorney appointed. If you can't afford one, that's the public defender. Anyway, I worked as a second counsel on a couple of murder cases, and I worked in the capital litigation division as a law clerk, not as a lawyer, for a while, and so I had some exposure to the people who took on murder cases, and even though I never first chaired any murder cases myself, and one of the joke defenses that criminal defense attorneys on murder cases would come up with when they were totally desperate was, yeah, but think of all the people my client didn't kill. That was like the most desperate, last ditch defense of criminal defense attorneys who had murder cases where there was no defenses. Yeah, he may have, done. It seems like there's evidence he may have killed someone in this case, but think of all the other people he came in contact with and didn't kill. Well, that is basically Charles Ramsey's defense to Chris Wallace's supposition here that it's a series of isolated incidents, or it's not really that probing a question anyway. But it's the last clip on this whole race question, flipped around by Fox News Sunday this morning, over in this clip.
Let's address it head on, this question of whether or not it's the media and maybe some politicians who are exploiting a few isolated incidents. Chief Ramsey, there certainly have been a series of incidents over the last year. You can say it's not a lot, but they have been dramatic. A lot of them recorded on body cams showing police acting recklessly, or their original stories didn't match up to what actually happened. You have a case like that in Philadelphia. Don't police actions add to some of the mistrust?
Sure. There's no question about that. But the problem is when that becomes the only thing that's shown, and there are hundreds of thousands of interactions that occur between police and community every single day that you don't know about because they absolutely went well. We've taken 2,000 guns off the streets of Philadelphia without a shot being fired by a police officer. Now, these are illegal guns being carried by a person. Those arrests are made, no one is injured. I mean, nobody talks about that sort of thing. So I think that it really does distort the view of what's going on in policing. We've got some issues that we've got to address. We've got police officers that engage in misconduct. But when the only thing that gets shown is that shooting that is bad. I had an officer that was murdered on March 5th of this year. There's video with that, which we will not show because we don't want to expose the family or anybody else to it. But those are the kinds of things and the dangers that police officers face every day. It gets overshadowed by the few incidences of misconduct.
So you can let me know what you think. Was that the think of all the people my client didn't kill defense from a, that's what Commissioner, I think is his title, Commissioner Charles Ramsey from Philadelphia, over on Fox News Sunday, playing out the narrative that Fox News Sunday has now taken on, that Black Lives Matter is instigating this war on cops in the United States. I think it's kind of ridiculous, but I wanted to give you a few clips covering it. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section about whether Black Lives Matter is bringing accountability to the police, or if they're starting a war on police. I think I've made my opinion pretty clear on that, and I actually want to move on to the next topic now. It's the Iran deal. There wasn't really that much news or that much coverage of the Iran deal, or news to cover from the Sunday morning shows. The big news this week, I guess, is that President Obama got 34 senators to support the Iran deal, the nuclear deal, and so that means that if the House and the Senate pass a resolution saying that the Congress is against the deal, President Obama can veto it, and there will now not be enough senators to override his veto. That's the way the whole thing was structured, because the only way that the Congress has input into the deal anyway is removing the congressional sanctions, and the way the sanctions were passed back when they originally passed under George W. Bush, I think, and then they may have been increased under the early Obama administration. But anyway, they were originally passed so that the president could actually waive the sanctions by citing national security. So Obama already had the power to waive the sanctions, and then he worked out this deal with Congress where they could try to override that if they could get 2/3 of the Senate and House, and they can no longer do that. So that was the big deal. But that's not the first clip. The first clip is actually that kind of joke I showed from Fox News earlier, where their fair and balanced discussion is Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney. This is just Dick Cheney, and it's actually a somewhat confrontational question from Fox News host Chris Wallace, where he says that, or he points out to Dick Cheney that Iran actually grew their centrifuges significantly during George W. Bush's administration, and Dick Cheney's answer is really ridiculous, because he says that actually we had a real military threat against the Iranian regime at some point because of our invasion of Iraq. But the truth is, the reason there isn't really a military threat against Iran is because of our the United States failed invasion of Iraq, and failed Iraq policy has actually given Iran a lot more power and given Iran assurances that the United States is not going back in there with a lot of military forces. But you can see the ridiculous answer on the whole Iran deal from Dick Cheney, which I'll discuss a little more after you watch it yourself here.
Mr. Vice President, you say that President Obama never put a serious nuclear option on the table, but you and President Bush, the Bush-Cheney administration, dealt with Iran for 8 years, and I think it's fair to say that there was never any real serious military threat. And during your time, let's put these numbers up on the screen, Iran went from 0 known centrifuges in operation to more than 5,000. So, in fairness, didn't you leave, the Bush-Cheney administration, leave President Obama with a mess?
Well, I don't think of it that way. In fact, there was military action that had an impact on the Iranians. It was when we took down Saddam Hussein. There was a period of time when they stopped their program because they were afraid that what we did to Saddam, we were going to do to them next. We also, when we took down Saddam, Muammar Gaddafi surrendered up his nuclear program. When we got that, then we went and got his supplier, Mr. A.Q. Khan. We did a lot to limit nuclear proliferation in the region while we were there.
But the centrifuges went from 0 to 5,000.
Well, they may well have gone, but that happened on Obama's watch, not on our watch.
No. By 2009, they were at 5,000.
Right, but I think we did a lot to deal with the arms control problem in the Middle East. We signed on with the our international friends and allies and the Europeans and started the negotiations process So what we did not do is what Obama did. He never had a military option on the table. He talked about it repeatedly, but nobody believed him, especially after he waffled on the Syrian deal. There never was a military option that the Iranians had to worry about. So the situation also involved, he was paying cash to the Iranians, get them just to come to the table. He was making, lifting sanctions just to get them to come to the table. He always dealt from a position of weakness, which I don't think we would have done.
Then.
So, like I said, and I don't know, I kind of rambled a little in the introduction there, but I think that former Vice President Dick Cheney had a really bad answer there, because the reason that there isn't a credible military threat against Iran is because of the failed Iraq policy of the Bush-Cheney administration. They actually gave a lot more power to Iran by getting rid of Saddam Hussein, and now Iran has a lot of control over what's going on in Iraq, and also knows that the American public is not going to support the much greater number of troops and casualties necessary to strike Iran than would that the American people have already expended in this failed policy in Iraq. So what Dick Cheney said there was totally ridiculous. And then I want to show one more clip on this whole Iran deal over on CNN's State of the Union. Jake Tapper had on the head of the Democratic National Committee and Florida member of Congress, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, who came on State of the Union to say that she was actually endorsing the Iran deal. Oh, and I have been reading your comments while I've been showing the clips. The latest one I noticed from, I think it was Tim Snow. Let me see if I can. Oops.
If you want to understand why Hillary Clinton felt she had to sit down for a 30-minute nationally televised...
Sorry about that. A little technical glitch there. I'm trying to import this screen capture.
If you want to understand why...
I don't know why that NBC Meet the Press clip keeps coming up when I... So Tim Snow asked, do you feel the Iran deal is a good deal? And my answer to that question is yes, I do believe the Iran deal is a good deal. I think it's better than military action. The threat of military action isn't even credible, but I think that it is a good way to put off Iran's nuclear weapon for 10 or 15 years at least, and see if there's a good evolution of the Iranian regime. If they, there are a lot of really, I can't remember the exact demographics of Iran, but there's a huge percentage of the population that's under 30 that has a love of Western culture and even the United States, and wants changes. And I think it's quite possible if you wait 10 or 15 years that the pressure from that generation is going to cause political change because of the demographics of Iran. But that's one reason I support the Iran deal. And I want to show this clip of the head of the DNC, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, saying that she supports the Iran deal, and she actually kind of tears up talking about her love of Israel and being a Jewish woman in this next clip. Last week I showed a CNN anchor kind of tearing up talking to the parents of a shooting victim, so I guess this is my requisite tearing up clip of the week. Debbie Wasserman-Schultz talking to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union, declaring her support for the Iran deal. The last Iran clip for tonight over here.
Incredibly important to me. We only have about a minute left, but I want to address something that's very clear to you, I know, in that there are a lot of constituents of yours. There are a lot of Jews who are going to say, you sold out Israel. And what are you going to say to them?
I'm the first Jewish woman to represent Florida in Congress. I'm a Jewish mother, and I wrote an op-ed today that's in the Miami Herald, one of my hometown papers, that talks about my Jewish heart and how important this was to me, that as a Jewish mother, that we have a concept of l'dor v'dor, from generation to generation. There's nothing more important to me as a Jew to ensure that Israel's existence is there throughout our generations. And I am confident that the process I've gone through to reach this decision is one that will ensure that Israel will be there forever. It is the homeland of my people. I'm an American citizen, and I believe fervently in protecting America's national security interests. And there is no way that we would be able to ensure that better than approving this deal and ensuring that Iran is not ever able to get access to nuclear weapons, and that we can shift our focus with the rest of the world on going after their terrorist ambitions. And most importantly, I had the privilege of talking with President Obama last night, who assured me that as we move forward and discuss with Israel the enhanced security package that will absolutely be essential for us to provide to Israel, as well as ensure that we tighten our ability to enforce this deal, that I'll be part of a group of members of Congress that will be working with him and his administration on that. That's critical for me.
Obviously a very, very difficult decision for you, Congresswoman Wasserman-Schultz. There's a lot of politics I want to talk to you about as well, the Democratic debates, Hillary Clinton, Planned Parenthood. You've agreed to come back and you'll talk to me on Tuesday on the lead so we can address that.
Look forward
Thank
to
you
that.
so much for talking to me about it.
So actually that'll be kind of interesting to see that follow-up interview on the lead with Jake Tapper on CNN on Tuesday, where Debbie Wasserman-Schultz will talk about whether they're going to expand the number of Democratic debates and Planned Parenthood. I don't know exactly what she's going to talk about. So that's the last clip I want to show of the two clips on the Iran deal. Like I said, there's not a lot of news except for President Obama getting to the point where he can stop Congress from overriding his veto. His next benchmark will be if he can get the Senate to filibuster a resolution to disapprove of his Iran deal. Then he won't even have to veto it at all, and that will be coming up sometime in the next, I think, what is it, like 40 days left for the Congress to vote on the Iran deal. I'm not exactly sure. But so the final topic I want to cover is kind of blew up on the internet this last week. It was regarding marriage equality, same-sex marriage. This Kentucky Clerk Kim Davis, I posted on my Facebook page during the week. If you're not, if you haven't liked my Facebook page, you're missing important news right when it happens on various topics that I cover later in the week possibly. But you can find my Facebook page at facebook.com/LiberalViewer. That's pretty easy to find, and you'll see on my page right around when it happened, I posted this video of a confrontation between Kentucky Clerk Kim Davis and some gay couples who were trying to get marriage licenses in Rowan County, Kentucky. And I'm going to show 4 clips on that. First, from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They had their reporter Alex Perez in Kentucky covering what happened and giving even a clip from what happened in that confrontation that is on my Facebook page. I think it was on Tuesday, and now Kim Davis, of course, is in jail, all reported on ABC this morning here.
In this week's Closer Look, a new firestorm over that Kentucky clerk refusing to issue marriage licenses to gay couples. Kim Davis is vowing to stay in jail to honor her faith, sparking a new debate about religious liberty and the duties of public officials. We'll talk live to her staunch supporter Mike Huckabee after this from Alex Perez.
This morning in Kentucky, Rowan County Clerk Kim Davis is still behind bars for contempt of court after refusing last week to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples.
We're not issuing a marriage license today.
But by Friday, hugs and cheers in that same office.
Congratulations!
Robbie Blankenship and Jesse Cruz among the very first couples given the green light to get married in Rowan County after Kim Davis's deputies agreed to follow that federal judge's order.
This is more about than just the piece of paper, right? What is it about?
It's about equality. It's about equal rights. It's about being the same as the neighbor to the left of me and the neighbor to the right of me.
In June, the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage nationwide, changing the law in 13 states that previously banned gay marriage, including Kentucky. Davis is one of 17 other county clerks in Kentucky who sent letters to the governor in July saying issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples goes against their deeply held religious beliefs.
Under whose authority are you not issuing licenses?
Saturday, supporters are turning out for Davis. Presidential candidates weighing in too. Mike Huckabee tweeting, Kim Davis in federal custody removes all doubts about the criminalization of Christianity in this country. Meanwhile, Davis could remain in custody until she either resigns or follows the law. Her husband says she won't give up and that he supports her.
And I don't care. They can't bully me.
Davis's attorneys are appealing. For This Week, Alex Perez, ABC News, Morehead.
So, like I said, that was the report from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Their reporter, Alex Perez, I think, did a pretty good overview. And then, as George Stephanopoulos said in the introduction to that clip, they had on Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee, who's down in Kentucky, showing his support for Kim Davis. And he was over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, showing his total misunderstanding of Article 3 of the Constitution that gives the U.S. Supreme Court the power of judicial review, and also the whole idea of the common law where courts interpret statutes and make law through case law, which is judge-made law. It's just as good as statutory law, but Mike Huckabee either doesn't understand that or more likely is being willfully ignorant to drum up support amongst right-wing evangelicals over in this clip.
On Tuesday as a part of demonstration in support of Kim Davis, but there are some dissenting voices in the conservative movement. I wanted you to respond to something from Rod Dreher in the American Conservative. He says if the Supreme Court makes a ruling we don't like, we are obliged to obey the law or be willing to suffer the consequences of disobedience. What we cannot do and what the government cannot permit is open defiance of settled law. He believes this is going to backfire on the religious liberty movement. What's your response?
Well, he would have hated Abraham Lincoln because Lincoln ignored the 1857 Dred Scott decision that said black people weren't fully human. It was a wrong decision. And to say that we have to surrender to judicial supremacy is to do what Jefferson warned against, which is, in essence, surrender to judicial tyranny. And we had so many different presidents, including Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln. There were other founders like Hamilton, Adams, who made it very clear that the courts can't make a law. The Constitution is expressly clear that that's a power reserved to Congress. When the courts have a ruling, then it is incumbent upon Congress to codify that into law and specifically delineate what that means. That hasn't happened, George.
But, sir, how is this different than...
Oh, sorry, I cut that off before the next question, although I'm going to show that question in a minute. I just thought that that much of the response from former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee showed a total ignorance of, like I said, the power of the Supreme Court to engage in judicial review and to make law through case law, which somehow I don't think Mike Huckabee, even though he's not a lawyer, he's a former preacher, a former Baptist minister, I think, but I think he must know enough about the law to know that what he's saying is total garbage. But George Stephanopoulos then tried to get him to see the light by comparing marriage equality to racial, marriage equality for interracial couples, and Mike Huckabee's answer is not very satisfying in saying, well, now we're redefining marriage. That was something that was acceptable, but this is unacceptable. And then this is actually almost, I think it's 3.5 minutes, because I want to show all the way through this disingenuous argument I've been hearing over and over on Fox News this week about how, this clerk in Kentucky is being put in jail, but when Gavin Newsom in San Francisco married same-sex couples, he was never put in jail, or President Obama is not enforcing immigration law and he's never put in jail. But of course, neither one of them actually disobeyed a court order from a federal judge after it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, we are not going to hear your appeal of that order. That, that's a final, no longer in contention order from a federal judge. That is totally different from what Mike Huckabee's talking about. And I don't think I really buy his differentiation from Loving versus Virginia, the case that said that miscegenation laws that said that interracial couples couldn't marry was unconstitutional. I don't think he differentiates in a way that is persuasive, but you let me know what you think after you watch that clip here.
How is this different then from Loving versus Virginia back in 1967? Of course, that was the Supreme Court ruling that struck down bans on interracial marriage. If a clerk at that time had said, listen, my religious beliefs forbid me from issuing this license, would you support that?
Well, it's an incredibly different situation because what the Supreme Court did in Loving, no, it's not the same, George, not even close. Because in Loving, you still had a marriage which was a man and a woman, and it was equal protection, but it didn't redefine marriage. What the Supreme Court did in June, and this is why
you didn't have laws implementing the ruling then either. So would it have been okay to defy the Supreme Court in that case?
I think it's a very different equation altogether because this is a redefinition. Marriage is not defined in the federal Constitution at all. It's a matter for the states. And applying the 14th Amendment to the equality of men and women in their relationship in marriage is totally different than redefining marriage. And I think what we've seen here is the overreach of the judiciary. This, if allowed to stand without any congressional approval, without any kind of enabling legislation, is what Jefferson warned us about.
I'm not sure I follow your reasoning, sir. This is exactly the same. In both cases, you have the Supreme Court saying that state laws don't further the Constitution, don't further the 14th Amendment.
George, can you cite for me what statute Kim Davis would be required to follow in order to issue a same-sex marriage license in Kentucky when her state specifically says by 75% of the voters that marriage means one man, one woman? Can you cite the statute at the federal or state level that she's supposed to follow? Even the very form that she fills out specifically lists a male and a female. Does she have the authority just to scratch that out and create her own?
Doesn't she have the duty to obey a legal order from the court?
Well, you obey it if it's right. So I go back to my question. Is slavery the law of the land? Should it have been the law of the land because Dred Scott said so? Was that a correct decision? Should the courts have been irrevocably followed on that? Should Lincoln have been put in jail because he ignored it? I mean, that's the fundamental question. Do we have a check and balance system? Do we have three equal branches, or do we have one supreme branch, not just a Supreme Court? That's the fundamental question. And, George, this is a bigger issue than this one thing. This goes back to the larger issue of whether or not what we've learned in ninth grade civics is even still operative, and why people are so angry across the country, not just on this issue, but on others, is that the ruling class has thumbed their nose at the very Constitution. You've got Democrats who ignored the law when it was the law to have traditional marriage. Gavin Newsom in San Francisco as mayor performed same-sex weddings even though it was illegal. Did he ever get put in jail? He most certainly did not. You have Barack Obama and Eric Holder when he was Attorney General. They ignored the rulings of DOMA. Did they get put in jail for ignoring the law? They most certainly did not. So when is it that liberals get to choose which laws they support? But a county clerk in Kentucky who, acting on her Christian faith, is criminalized, jailed without bail because she acted on her conscience and according to the only law that is in front of her.
One of the most...
Now, like I said, this clerk in Kentucky, Kim Davis, has disobeyed an order from a federal judge that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denied her attorney's request for a stay. And that is very different from Gavin Newsom in San Francisco marrying couples, and then he didn't marry couples anymore once the court said he couldn't marry couples anymore, or President Obama, his office of the Solicitor General deciding no longer to defend DOMA, but that was in court. He never disobeyed a federal court order. Can you imagine how on the immigration context, which is the other place I hear on Fox News all week about how President Obama has disobeyed the law on immigration, isn't enforcing immigration law, but he's not in jail. There is actually a lawsuit that is temporarily suspended a lot of President Obama's executive order on immigration because the Republicans decided to challenge it in front of this judge in Texas who's really sympathetic to the Republican side, and he is stopped President Obama from implementing some of his planned executive order on giving legal status to a larger group of undocumented immigrants. Can you imagine what would happen if President Obama actually disobeyed an order from a federal judge, like this woman Kim Davis did? I'm sure the Republicans would impeach him if he actually disobeyed an order from a federal judge. I mean, he's fighting it in a court. He's appealing what this district court judge has decided in Texas, and he's actually not having complete success, although ultimately I think what the Obama administration has done is well in line with what previous administrations have done on immigration, and I've talked about that repeatedly in previous shows. But I want to show one more clip on the issue of marriage equality. This is bad analysis on NBC's Meet the Press from both Chuck Todd and historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, talking about how the really good news is that Kim Davis is the only clerk, this is the only person who's disobeying the Supreme Court's decision on marriage equality. But if you remember back to that introductory report from Alex Perez from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, he talked about how there were actually 17 clerks in Kentucky that signed this letter saying they couldn't issue marriage licenses. The real reason that there's only Kim Davis at this point is a lot of counties only issue like 2 or 3 marriage licenses altogether every year. I think I saw another pundit talking about this. I can't remember who it was. But I know this, having worked as a lawyer at the county level, is, there are some rural counties where they don't do much in terms of issuing marriage licenses, and they may not have a gay couple come in there for a same-sex marriage license. It may take, 5-10 years for the first time that even comes up. So this is kind of some Pollyannish analysis on NBC's Meet the Press with Chuck Todd and Doris Kearns Goodwin not understanding the mistake they're making in the final clip for the show tonight over here.
Dramatic week in Kentucky. We had a showdown between a clerk not wanting to issue marriage licenses. She ends up being taken away to jail. Presidential candidates all weighed in. But Doris, I was struck by something else. This is the only place in the country that we've had this. Meaning that I think a lot of people thought there would be more clerks that wouldn't do this.
I mean, that's the most important thing to realize. We get so focused on this one person in this one county, but the Supreme Court spoke on a very controversial issue, and all over the country, in other registrars and other county things, people have gone issuing marriage licenses. And that's the important thing to understand, that social movement created an acceptance. Maybe this will have copycat thing going on after this, but at this point in time, it is accepted by the country, and that's pretty extraordinary.
It's not just copycats. I think they're overestimating the acceptance in some areas of the United States of the Supreme Court's ruling, which was a 5-4 ruling after all. And if you look at the response from the presidential candidates, there are a lot of Republicans who still support this Kentucky Clerk Kim Davis. So anyway, that's the last clip I want to show for the program or the broadcast tonight. I hope you enjoyed the 30 clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows, and I think I had one clip from Reliable Sources, which is more of a media criticism show, just to show you how Fox News has decided to create this war on Black Lives Matter, which I think is kind of bogus. If you have read the books up here, the New Jim Crow and The Divide by Michelle Alexander and Matt Taibbi, and also if I appreciate all of you who just watch the show, who post the comments. I think I had over 1,000 comments this week from the live viewers, and I've been reading all your comments from the recorded show. I see a lot of you want me to make a video about Fox News versus Donald Trump, and hopefully I'll be able to get that up on Thursday or Friday of this week. It's another kind of packed week for me, but I'm at least putting in all this time on Sundays, and if you want to help support me beyond commenting and watching and sharing this video, you can become one of my patrons by clicking, if you hover your mouse over the corner of the video here, and click on that little eye. The top half of it, or top eighth of it, you can give a direct donation to my channel, or the bottom 7/8 of it, you can click on that and it'll take you to my Patreon page, and you can become one of my patrons to help defer the cost of the 10 or 12 hours I put into the show every Sunday, and until next Sunday, when I should be doing it again, and hopefully I should have a video on Fox News versus Donald Trump up on Thursday or Friday. I may even put a draft version of it up 24 hours or so early for comments by my patrons. I do that sometimes when I can get it done a little early, so that's another little advantage for becoming one of my Patreon patrons by clicking on that little eye up there. And I appreciate my viewers who watched as a live show. I think I had about 160, like I said, over 1,000 live comments. And also on my Patreon page, when I post this video on the Patreon page, I also will post a file showing those 1,000+ live comments. If you wonder where they go, they kind of disappear after the live show. Anyway, until next week, again at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I should again be doing my LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup, picking out the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. Next week, I should also have clips from Real Time with Bill Maher for the real political comedy, not just Sarah Palin. And I guess until next week, I will be seeing all of you around the internet.